Well, you can do all those things and so much more. Just grab a seat in the chair or the floor. Sit back, relax, recline. While she drops another casual line. You're tuned into Casually Molly with Molly and Bergie.
Thank you. Hello. Welcome back to the Casually Molly podcast. I am your host, Molly Ambergy. Again, just a friendly reminder, or to new listeners, welcome. We are based here in St. Louis, Missouri. We cover all comedians, artists, entertainers, you name it. And thank you again for anybody who's been listening on our streaming services or watching on YouTube. Just make sure to casually like, listen, and subscribe. But speaking of fun things, I just wanted to welcome, he is a St. Louis entrepreneur, just one of the favorites here in St. Louis and keeps the city going. Give it up for Bayoc, Jon Beeby, everybody, or as I like to know and call him, the Beebs. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you. So for people who are listening in, normally we cover, which, I mean, let's just put it this way. You are very entertaining, obviously, but you are the entrepreneurial spirit behind Bayoc, which is the clothing brand here in St. Louis that's attached to Midcoast Media, where we record our podcast. And I've seen Jon back there. I've looked at all his stuff, and I say back, meaning just behind this wall if you're watching on YouTube. But yeah, I've known Jon for a while now, and I was like, hey man, you got to sit and talk with us about all your things that you do, because I feel like you're always very modest about all your accomplishments. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I'm the most modest person you'll ever meet. No, I mean, I started Bayoc as an add-on to another company that I was running. And then when my time kind of came to an end at that company and I wasn't really working there much longer, I was kind of like, I just want to carry on this merchandising thing. So I started up Bayoc as a totally new entity. Mm-hmm. And that was in Southern Illinois. And then we ended up moving it up to St. Louis, and it started in my front living room, and it was always just this like, oh yeah, we can kind of just do this. And then it kind of built, and then we merged into Midcoast Media with both Chris and Beth, and then we got an office space, and then it was kind of like, oh, this is actually a thing now that we're doing. And it kind of built from there, and now we have a small warehouse, I guess would be the best way to describe it, rather than, so it was literally, we were in like an office block before, so it was like, we're not really like full production, and then it moved into that. So to me, it's not something that I kind of like run around and rave about. It's more just, it's fun. Like I always kind of sit there with my wife, and my wife works for a pharmaceutical company, and I'm like, oh, you're like saving lives. What did I do? I printed some t-shirts today. So it's like, I kind of know where I am on like, big events and things like that. Like, we're the merch people, and I enjoy that position on it, because there's not a huge amount of responsibility apart from show up with merchandise and sell it.
Absolutely. No, well, I do admire everything that you do, because my dad, I don't know if you know this, he actually used to work in apparel for many years. So I am familiar with the kind of process that goes into it and whatnot. And obviously now that we're, this was in the 90s when my dad was in like early 2000s when he was in apparel. But, and now in 2023, I'm sure a lot has changed. But let's talk about, speaking of background, what brought you to St. Louis? Were you always in apparel, or what brought you to our city, basically? So why are you here?
So it started, I still run a company in the UK, which is based in live events.
And so you're from the UK, not to interrupt.
Yeah, sorry.
Which part are you from?
So I grew up as a kid in Nottingham. Then, which is about 2 hours north of London.
Yes.
Like right in the kind of shadows of Nottingham Castle, where the whole Robin Hood thing went on.
Yes.
Yeah, probably distant relatives.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I love, and this is like, I don't know if this is just a British thing, but I love how you just glossed over that. You're like, Robin Hood and we might be distant relatives. We're not sure.
Well, I also don't know that. Was Robin Hood real? I don't know.
Right. Who knows? Right.
It's all right. Kevin Costner is Robin Hood. That's fine. So,
yes.
Mm-hmm. No, so I grew up there, and then went off to boarding school, and then kind of just traveled a lot after that. So went to I moved up to Glasgow in Scotland where I went to university, then moved to New York for like 6 months.
Oh, that probably was a big change coming from, the other side of the world to New York City. What was that like?
I had zero plans. I was like, I'm going to change the world. 6 months later, I was on a plane, no money in my pocket, on the way back to the UK to be like, oh, okay. And then I moved to Edinburgh from there, where I lived on my friend's couch for another 6 months, just like smoking weed every day. And my dad was super proud of me at this point. He was like, yes. And he basically was like, can you just sort your life out? So I was like, yep. So I moved back in with my dad in Nottingham. Then I got a job in London. And that's what took me into like corporate, like award shows and events and things like that. So worked at that company for about 3 years. And then me and one of the guys that worked there started our own business. And this led eventually where we were like, okay, we enjoy doing this, but it's, it's bread and butter money. Like it wasn't really kind of pushing us. So we decided to like build up an investment fund to go and invest in another small business.
Oh, okay.
Which we then invested in a video gaming company in Southern Illinois. And then,
wow.
Which was all based in events. We wanted to do the event side of esports. So we looked at that. And then part of that company was merchandising. Mm-hmm. And I'd always thought like, oh, I could do like funny t-shirts. And I'm pretty sure everyone's thought this, like, oh, I should do like make funny t-shirts.
Right.
Turns out I had 2 funny t-shirt ideas. But when you're in that industry, you need to start like using other people to like, build up, let's pay the rent, pay the bills, because no one wants to buy your one funny t-shirt, and how do you market that side of stuff? So we ended up starting by doing local business, which was high school, sports teams and things like that. And it led us to the backbone of what Bayoc is now, which is people would come back and say, well, I need one more t-shirt. So as your dad would know, like screen printing, you're resetting everything up and things like that. So I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And it was all digital. So we went into digital printing, which allowed us to produce stuff like on demand at no extra cost. So someone could come back 6 weeks later and go, I need one more t-shirt. And we would have all the art files, print one more for them at no extra cost. And then I hit like a concrete ceiling. I was like, there's only so many t-shirts you can print in a town of 6,000 people. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, where do I want to go from there? And rather than like pick anywhere in America, I just went, what's the closest city, which was St. Louis.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
And so moved to St. Louis, shut down everything in Southern Illinois, all of our workforce, everything, moved everything to, like I said, my living room, and then was like, now we wait.
Right.
And I didn't, again, it was kind of like I'd never really just gone and started like business to consumer, like how do you start to build this, out? So it was very much just like, okay, we're going to go and do, I think they still do it like 1 million cups. Like the coffee get together where businesses go in and do that sort of stuff. So I went to things like that, and that's where I started to meet people that what I realized was all these startup businesses, the one thing in common was merchandise. Like everybody needs their mugs or t-shirts or whatever else.
Very true.
So it's like, oh, let's start doing that. So we started off small doing that, and then that led us into the music scene. Then the music scene led us into multiple different things, because everyone in the music scene seemed to have 9 other jobs, and they were like, oh, my building company needs this and this and this. And I was like, yep, that's fine. And then that's when I met Chris Denman.
Yes.
And then that kind of exploded into podcasting. And then I met Beth through Chris. And then we all came together around the time of Lou Fest.
Yes.
And then we were like, we all have 3 very unique kind of talents that we can put together. And that was when Midcoast Media kind of came up. And Bayoc's now stayed as its own brand underneath Midcoast Media, and repping people like Pauly Shore from MTV to Michael Yo, who's a stand-up comic.
Katie Tupin, I saw her too. Yeah.
And then we do other businesses around town like SLSO, the Shakespeare, like Shakespeare in the Park, or the Shakespeare Festival. And then also just multiple businesses and stuff like that. So it's this kind of bizarre thing of like when people say, well, who do you work for? And you don't know in St. Louis, should you say we work for the symphony or should you say Pauly Shore? And it's like, you have to make that decision pretty early on in the conversation.
Well, I think that's good, though, not to interrupt you, but I do think it's good. And what I'm impressed about with your branding, and to give a background, like I had mentioned probably earlier in the podcast, Midcoast Media is where we record this podcast. We're in the studio right now, and Bayoc is just literally right next door. And that's how, even in the old building, that's how I met you. And you know, Jon has like this great wall of assortment. So anybody that would come in, I do appreciate that. You've got like, you know, the soccer stuff that you were advertising, sports. And what I have to give to you is that you've got a hand in everything. Like you are obviously like Pauly Shore, big name, Michael Yo, big name, even Katie Chupin. She's very talented singer, songwriter. You've got all these bigger names that are in the repertoire of things you do. But what I do appreciate is that you stay true to your local roots here in St. Louis and help out other people as well. So I guess like my question for you is, how do you balance all of that between like the bigger clients that you might have and then also like the local clients that you have as well when you're structuring your time and balance and going in between both?
The comedic answer is I don't balance it at all. It is long days of just and trying to prioritize. It's something that I'm terrible at, of like, it's just what's at the forefront of my mind, or like literally I wake up and there's a text message and I'm like, right, I've got to get on with that. But the reality is like, I try and treat everyone as equal as you can.
And that's the answer I was looking for. Thank you. Jon fell right into the trap. Equality. I love it.
You try to, but actually it's not really about who is more important. It's what deadline is more important.
Exactly.
So for instance, like Katie Chupin the other week launched her tour.
Yes,
and we needed to we needed to like update all of her tour merch and tour posters and things like that. So that might come over someone that's, you know, a bigger name, or, you know, if someone's got an event that's when I mean a nobody, I mean just like it's a family event. It's not got any notoriety that we would ever promote, but it's this weekend. That's more important than Pauly Shore doing something in 3 weeks' time. So it's deadline driven more than, you know, popularity or something like that. And the other thing you realize very quickly, and I'm sure you notice it as well working with any level of celebrityism, is everyone's just a human.
Yeah.
And you realize that very quickly, and you're like, actually, it doesn't really matter. I'm just talking to another client.
Exactly.
So as fun as it is having a phone call with Pauly or Katie or, you know, one of the directors at SLSO or new business or anything, the reality is like, it's another client, and that client is as important. Once you've got them in your kind of wheelhouse, you're just trying to make sure that like you keep everyone as happy as you can. And sometimes, you know, in any small business, like things get like slipped through the net, and you just have to try and work with people on that and say, we'll do better and build that up. So
absolutely. And that's what I wanted you to highlight, because obviously the resume and the repertoire is super impressive, but that's what makes you probably so I mean, and not probably, it does, Jon, is that you are very flexible on, you know, trying to make everybody happy. I know, because sometimes Jon will pop in the studio before I'm about to like interview somebody just to say hi. And he's like, oh, one moment, I have to like go talk to a client real quick. And then he comes back and talks to me. And I was like, you know, I really appreciate that balance. And, you know, speaking of balance too, you know, you've got all these other interests as well. Like I know you've been behind the camera too, and podcasting and whatnot. Now, how do you, I guess, with merchandising, how do you correlate that with podcasting and all your other endeavors? Because I feel like you do a really nice job of making all of that work hand in hand.
So the company, so Midcoast as a whole, is we very much have three separate lanes. So Beth does the marketing and PR stuff and that's how I met Pauly, was through like Beth and
sure thing,
like Dave Keckner from The Office and Anchorman and stuff. That came in through working with Beth, and then Beth saying, hey, they really need help with merchandising, or they're unhappy with their merch provider. Can you help out, or anything like that? Then the like flip side of it is you have like Chris as well, who, you know, brings podcasts in like you, and then you end up just, when people are consistently in and then they kind of come back and grab a coffee or water or whatever, they're like, whoa, you're working on this or that or whatever, conversation spark, and then people are like, oh, I need this. Like, it's a proxy thing at that point. And so I'm very lucky in our like sales funnels come through just them being able to use us and say, hey, can you throw a store together for this? Or can you have this conversation and advise someone? And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it's like, hey, we could do this, and it doesn't fit within the realm of what they do. But we've like Bayoc's never been a hard sell. Like it's never been you don't do this, do that. Like I always want to think that whatever someone needs, we can fulfill that section of their needs. So if they're like, hey, I love taking Sharpies and like drawing on t-shirts and selling them, it's like, cool, we're not going to sell that for you, but if you want something else that, you know, is built within that, we can provide that for you. We could build your store for you. We can help you out. And it's about fitting into and being malleable to fit in rather than saying, this is what we do. And if it doesn't fit with your business model, either change your business model or use someone else. And being able to say like, so Katie was the first person that we did fulfillment for.
Oh, Katie Tupin?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so
Again, great talented person.
Yeah. So she literally, we were talking about it, and I was always joking with her, being like, why will you do podcasts and this and that, like, but you won't ever do merch with us? And I was always, it's always lighthearted stuff. And then she was like, well, you need to be able to sell all my vinyl as well. And I was like, oh yeah, fine, we'll do that. Like, we'll figure out how to sell your vinyl if you move everything over. So we finally got her on board, and then a pallet, like, I mean, I didn't know how many vinyl records showed up, but it was at least 40 boxes of vinyl. And I was like, I have no idea where I'm going to store this. And a lot of that is that, like, and any small business owner will be like, oh, you just say yes.
Yes.
And then you freak out when it actually happens. And you're like, oh, okay, right. So it's like stacking up, mountain high, vinyl records. And then Katie comes into town and we do, signings and things like that. So
sure.
But it's about, and Katie and I agreed, like when we went into business together, would be, I'm going to do, anything that I can to help you out. And then you can help us formulate what's good for musicians, because I'm not a musician. I don't know what's important to certain musicians. So if she can inform us of how to do things better, then it means that we can go to another musician and say, this is how we work. And they're like, that's great. Can we change that? And then it's constant like evolution of the business, rather than being like, I'm set in my ways and this is how I'm going to do it. And it's really nice having fresh eyes, like from clients to people that work with us, and even just other people that can come in and say, I'd change it. I'd change this if you could, and things like that. So yeah, it's really nice. And I think it's quite refreshing for people that work with us, because they're like, oh, I didn't know that I could tell you. And I'm like, no, please.
It's a collaborative process in a sense. Yeah.
If you can tell us what we're doing wrong, that's so much easier. I'd rather keep you as a client and you tell me what's wrong than like you just be like, oh, that was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially like, that's what I appreciate with this, the collaborative process of it, is that, people don't realize too, like there is such a back and forth between the client and then also the merchandiser, being like, here's the image that I want to set and that I want to sell. And then you kind of have to fulfill those things. But then also, of course, too, if you don't necessarily see eye to eye, just like you said, you can like, tweak the business model, see how it works. And I wanted to highlight your business too, because, we do have comedians who listen to this podcast, obviously. And, even me being a comedian myself, I always look into merchandise, and I've done like, before I even knew you existed, I did like mugs and stuff. And there's a lot of like trial and error. And I guess like, for comedians that are listening, what would be like, speaking of a business model, let's say they come to you, just like you were talking about Katie Tupin, and they're looking just to even look for a shirt design and whatnot. I think sometimes the question can be like, how many do you get at once? And like, what is like the cap that you should get? Because I feel like a lot of times people get too little merchandise, or it's not as creative, or they get so much that they don't have the amount of sales maybe they would want for starting out until. And then also like, when you think would be the good time to start merchandising yourself, if you think that, I know it's kind of a loaded question, but.
Well, no. So I think the first thing is like, there's a difference between selling online and selling in person.
Sure.
And so like selling in person, what people are really doing is, when you're at a show and you've been on stage, and then you go out to the foyer and you're in the bar and you've got your, stack of shirts there, you don't have to be a headliner to sell a shirt.
Right.
So it's like, what I mean is, you don't have to be a headliner for people to want to buy a shirt.
Exactly.
And what really, the way I've always described it to my clients is, people are paying, and people will pay $25, $30 to get 5 minutes of your time. And they're not going to come up to you and just start talking when there's something to buy in front of you. So they will come up and they will purchase something as a talking point, and then to show their like, hey, I'm supporting you as much as I can, and things like that. When to start merchandising, I think when you've got, for comedians specifically, when you have a joke, in my opinion, that people will repeat back to you.
I agree with that.
So, for instance, I had a meeting with Tina Diebel last week.
Oh, she's great. We've had her on the podcast. She's been plenty of my shows. Big fan. Love her.
And like she has a live, laugh, love joke.
She
section.
does, yes.
And so I said, what would be funny is, because you obviously can't sell live, laugh, love stuff. Well, you could, but the whole point is she doesn't want to sell it. So I was talking, and it's a difficult thing as well, because I'm not a comedian, right? So I don't, like, I've got, like, I think a humorous mindset, but it doesn't mean that jokes will land or anything like that. So I'm very aware of telling comedians, like, what's funny, what's not funny. But I was like, I know that's a bit that you do, you know, in your set. So I concepted out, like, what if we took that joke and turned it into a piece? And I'm not going to spoil it because I want her to be able to promote it. But
and that makes total sense.
What if we can take that and turn it into something that you can sell and put and build into your joke routine? And then when people come out, they've got that joke fresh in their mind. They see it on the table. Bang, I want one of those. And then the store is, if she ever runs out of it, she can point people to the store. She can promote the store on social media and things like that. So the point that I would say a comedian is good to start doing that, you know, start building a kind of merch line, is when you've got the set jokes that are like your standard, that you know are like home run headers. And then I think how many, like, here's the best part about it is, like, if you've got a huge family, like all your family are buying your merch no matter what, just don't let that set the precedent for like, oh, I saw that with my merch, I'm going to double it next time. It's like, find on-demand printers. So like Bayoc does it, obviously. Like, we build stores for people. An order comes in, we print a piece of merch and we ship it for our clients, and they take, you know, their royalties from us selling for them. There are other companies that do all of this, Printify, Printful, there's a million.
Yes.
The downside to them is you have to build your own website. So like, you're paying $30 or so a month to have a store that they link into and do all that sort of stuff. So we don't charge for our stores. So our stores are done that you come to us and we make money when you make money. As long as we can do that, I will keep that as a thing. It allows it's the first stepping stone into the merch world, and we always want to allow people a low barrier to entry so that they don't have to pay us, well, here's $200 for us to build a store for you, and then you've got to start making money. So our aim is to try and give those stores to people for free so that they can start their own store and then see sales come in. Now, if we don't sell anything for 6 months, we'll have a conversation where it's like,
oh, of course,
either you need to promote this, or maybe it's not the right time for you, and then like we'll put that as a dormant store and we can reopen it later on. But I think like the amounts that I would do, if you can find a local like print on demand service, is ordering maybe 2 or 3 of each size. Put it like this, I've done music festivals where we've gone where there's been, you know, 20, 30,000 people, and we've only sold, you know, no more than 10 of each size. Now, what I would say is, if you can get 3 of each size of shirt, when your mediums run out, you just restock your mediums. You don't go, okay, well, and that's where the screen printing side of stuff is a little bit different. Like, well, you have to have a minimum of 25 shirts. And then what 25 shirts are you going to get? Has this worked? And that's the other benefit to the online store, is you can start to see what people are ordering from that store, to then give you a better directive of, all right, most people like design A, not design C, D, E, and F. And the only other thing I would say is, like, keep your catalog as small as you can, because there is this thing of paralysis of choice that, and I get it all the time. I get onto Amazon and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to buy that and that and that and that and that, put everything in my cart. And I'm like, yay. And then I'll go make a coffee and forget about it.
Yes.
So it's that thing of, if you have 28 items on your store, people are scrolling and they're like, oh, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. And then they go and they lose interest. Whereas if you only have to start with 3 or 4 items, it pushes people into like, okay, well, that's the ones that I want to buy. And it's not a paralysis of choice in that situation.
See, and that is so educational to hear. And now I can understand too behind the building and what, because I always knew a little bit about how your process worked and what you did. But yeah, it's definitely informative to comedians, especially where they're at the point of their career, like Tina, who are touring and traveling and doing all these great things. You know, eventually people are like, oh, well, you know, I really enjoyed seeing like somebody like Tina D-Ball, and I want to make that memory, and I want to buy some, I mean, and especially like I've done it too. If I go to a concert and I have a great time, I'm like, you know what? I wasn't planning on buying a shirt, but I had the best time, so I'll spend $25. And then I like I have a hoodie even from a 98 Degrees concert I went to like 5 years ago. But you know what? It was so fun. My friends all bought it together, and so now we have like pictures of us, and that's, as silly as it sounds, like that t-shirt or that hoodie or whatever was from that time and from that concert. So it's something that not just like me, but my friends can share together, which is why I feel like apparel and merchandising and what you do is so important as a part of branding and marketing, not just for comedians, but for musicians, songwriters, sports, which, speaking of importance in merchandising, a lot of companies that I see merchandise wise, and I won't say any names to throw shade here, but they obviously just go to Bayoc and you'll be very happy, I promise you, because that's what this is about. What I love about you, and this is what we were talking about earlier, and of course, like Jon was so sweet about it. He's like, well, I'm not trying to say like social media is bad, or like we understand that. But what I do like about you, and that's why I did the question about, oh, you know, being modest, and I was kidding around. But in all honesty, your website is it's very like visual, very educational. You see exactly what kind of branding, who you work with, all the 9 yards, right? But what you had mentioned and what I kind of was touching on were that you were like, oh, you know, everybody says you should be the face of Bayoc, and I don't necessarily want that. Like, I have 3 posts I did on my personal page about my baby announcement, this cancellation of a party, and what, you know, like, and so I guess, like, why is that a personal choice for you when running your company, just to keep it as a branding merchandise and not just be like, hello, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me, quoting Taylor Swift.
I can't be bothered. No, I think as soon as you start something like that, you have to really, and I respect other brands that do it, but it's a lifestyle choice. It's like everything I do has to emulate the brand. I have to be the brand all the time. And I have this thing where it's like Bayoc's one of the longest things that I've stuck to like in my entire life, like of doing like a job just consistently and and every, like, no joke. So I met my wife 4 years ago, and I'm pretty sure twice.
Oh my gosh. Wait, pause. How did you guys meet? What happened? So you came to St. Louis, and then
I came to St. Louis.
Okay.
I was on Bumble. We met, and then we went to the pageant and watched.
This is a good first date. Wait, sorry, what did you see? What?
The Struts. They're a British band. You'll have heard their music on multiple commercials and stuff.
I'm terrible with music and movie quotes, so I got to look it up. Yeah. Okay.
The Struts are they're like a modern day Queen, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Kind of glam rock and fun and stuff like that. So yeah, that was our first date. We went to Blueberry Hill, had a drink there, and then
that was my first date with my fiance. By the way, I went to Blueberry Hill as well. Not to interrupt, but I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder we get along. Our brains were like, you know where it's a great first date? Blueberry Hill. So don't worry.
Well, the guy that was working for me at the time, I was like, where do you like go near the pageant? He went, Blueberry Hill. The drinks are super strong. I was like, yeah, that wasn't that was. I wasn't like, where can I go to get this date super fucked up?
It happened. I had that too on mine. It was our first date. Jimmy's like, he never had a Mai Tai before. And speaking of strong drinks, so this bartender's like, oh, let me make you one. And she was super cute, put the umbrella. And man, I mean, you would have thought that I was like, I wasn't planning on this, and neither was he. But, you know, things happen. But continue. Go ahead.
So, yeah, but every year, more than once a year, she probably says every 3 weeks. But I come up with a new business idea. And it's whether it's, like, I think I have 9 different social media handles for different, like, joke businesses I want to start.
Okay.
So I have, like, one that's called The Worst Truck, but it's WURST, and it's a sausage truck, like German worst. What else did I have? The Wingmen. I have that social media handle, and that was for, like, you would show up and everyone would wear like Top Gun stuff, but you'd be serving chicken wings. And it was like wingmen, like full military stuff. So it's like, I have this like branding ideas. I'm like, oh, and this and this and this. And I do all the logo designs. Then my wife's just like, you have a company that's like doing like pretty well. Like, why do you put the energy into that? And I'm like, yeah, it's probably a good idea. So I just have this like, this constant thing of like, my Bayoc's a brand that I can separate myself from. And therefore like, I don't have to be the brand the whole time. And if I want to all of a sudden go like, oh, I'm going to like, you look at I've forgotten the guy's name, but the guy that runs Strange Donuts, it's like that is he is that brand, and he's like, that is him through and through, and no matter what he does, it links back to Strange Donuts, and it's awesome to see. But it's like, it must be so exhausting that every minute of your day you're constantly, not only are you running your business social media, but you're also doing your own personal one, which has to emulate the brand and has to be saying the same message, and you can never accidentally post something. It just, for me, I'd rather be focused on the behind the scenes and like getting everything going, and have other people, either be the face of it. I don't have that desire to be like front and center and be walking around going, yeah, I am Bayoc, if I'm being honest. Yeah, do you work there? I am there.
I am the brand.
And it's kind of nice sometimes, because like the other day I was in somewhere and someone came up to me and I had a Bayoc shirt on, and they're like, oh, do you work for Bayoc? And I was like, yep.
And then you just kept, oh, I love that.
I wasn't like, no, that's me. Like, but I like that side of it. There's an anonymity to it where you can just, you can actually get some positive feedback or negative feedback, and you can do it. That's so like, you're just a blank face at that point, and someone can tell you like, oh, I didn't like this or that. And you're like, oh, good to know. I'll let the owner know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can go away and you like, there was one thing that so on all of our shirts when we first started, the Bayoc logo it's like a cursive. The Jack's a cursive thing, and the BY is a typewriter font. And the idea was, it was like a traveling guy who would always sign like off on the quality of products. So it was a signature. So it was always the bottom right of whatever we were doing, we would put our logo on. And so on the back bottom right of the shirt, like the end of a letter, like we had the signature, like on the back of the shirt. And it wasn't until, I don't know, we were 2.5 years in, and someone was like, you do realize that nobody likes that? And I was like, really? And we had this whole conversation. They're like, oh, it takes away from the brand of the shirt, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, awesome, good to know. With that moment, we stopped printing on the back of the shirts.
Wow.
Because it was like, if there's a large enough, not even a large enough, if there's even a small sector of people that don't like something, it's like, stop doing that, because you can then just ostracize yourself. And it's so difficult to get that feedback. Like, I think more so in America than anywhere, because everyone's so positive and so like uplifting on like, oh, we're going to lift this brand up and blah, blah, blah. It's like, can you tell me what we're doing? Can you just be mean? Like, I need people to be
mean.
Yeah, honestly, like
that is a really, because I'm like, I didn't realize in America it was so positive. So this is interesting to hear for sure.
Well, I heard, again, I forget his name. I'm terrible with names, but the guy that designed the like iPod and the iPhone and stuff was a British.
Steve Jobs.
No.
What?
No. So Steve Jobs was obviously the owner of Apple.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
But there was another guy. I think his name was Steve as well. Anyway, he was the designer. He was a British guy from Newcastle in the UK, and he came over to America, and he put it perfectly. Someone said, "Why did you come to America?" And he said, "Because Americans will kindle like a flame of imagination, whereas British people will blow it out." So British people would just say to you, like, "Oh, I've got this idea for a merchandising brand where we print on demand," and someone would be like, "Why would you do that?"
Really?
That's the response. Not like, "Oh, interesting. Tell me more."
Yeah.
They're just like, "That's stupid. Just go and get a job at the sandwich shop." It's so brutal. But then, like, I feel that in the UK, the people that really battle through that will stick to whatever they're doing, like through and through. In America, you get everyone's an entrepreneur, everyone's a business starter.
That is true. Shark Tank is like one of the most viewed shows in America. It's true though. They're like, oh, I have the spirit. Now I will say, now that Shark Tank's gotten the explosion that it's got, like watching the old episodes, if anybody's interested in this, it's like the weirdest thing to see because it was very calm. Mm-hmm. People would listen, like Mr. Wonderful, Kevin, who's like known to be he wasn't as severe. Like it was, John, if you can imagine it, it was just like this weird round circle. Like somebody would be standing in front of us right now, if you're watching on YouTube, and they had like money stacks
Yeah,
on
yeah,
there.
yeah.
It was very like, and it was just like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I have this. And they were like, absolutely. Yes. But now that I think the popularity, everybody, and also for TV,
You've got to build,
like,
you've got to
like,
build that.
all right, this is terrible. Worst, you're dead to me. You're out of here. And then that guy straight up was the inventor of the Ring doorbell. So, you know, like,
That's so
what I'm
funny.
saying. That's why I was surprised when you said that, because, you know, I think for Americans who aren't, you know, used to the British culture, I always, anytime I hear like a British accent, I think of very refined, very like, oh, let's do this, let's do that. So it's interesting.
With a strong
you know.
undercurrent of hate.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. It's all up here. It's like a swan. It's like, oh, look how graceful you are. Just kick the shit into you under the water.
That's just, it's hilarious. Well, I had the great pleasure of visiting London with my mom had never been. So when she was in her 50s, she was like, listen, we're going. I remember being like in the 4th grade, and we went to like all the touristy stuff. Like we saw Harrods, and you know, we went to Oxford because that's where Harry Potter was filmed. So of course, like me being in the 4th grade, I'm like, oh, I'd love to see. And of course, like you see the Grand Hall, which is really where hilariously like where people like eat lunch or things like that. And you just think of it the way it is in the movie. So I was very fortunate, but I will say one thing about Britain that I really appreciated was I loved all, and I think that's why too, I loved all the pubs that were in there. And like, there was one cool one where we went down, there's like a tiny little, I can't remember the name of it, but we went down the staircase and I had like the classic fish and chips, obviously, but everybody was so nice. They're like, oh, you're American, you know, where are you from? Or like, which part? And of course, like, we're not from the cool places like LA or New York. They're like, are you from Texas? Like, do you have like I'm like, I'm from Ohio, Cincinnati. I was like, we just live in a house. And I remember like the lady we were staying with at the time, was a friend of a friend, and we stayed with her at her house for a little bit before going downtown in London for a couple of days. She looked at our house, and this is just like, again, culturally hilarious. She goes, oh my God, you live in a mansion. And it's like, it just was like your typical middle class. I mean, it's not a lovely childhood, not complaining, but it did just make me laugh that like everything is kind of like closer together there. So of course,
specifically in London, my family were over from the UK for Christmas this year.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating talking about like housing prices. And it's like, oh, like, and then they started like looking at like, okay, if I live in London or Edinburgh or whatever else, what do I get for the equivalent of like a 5-bedroomed house in the county in St. Louis? And they're like, yeah, I get like a shoebox apartment where I sleep in the sink. Like, that's it. That's what I get. But it's London. Like that. And that's what I always try and like, I came to St. Louis like through work and stuff like that. And I like genuinely adore this city. And that's not like a hype up of like, look how much I love the city. Like, it was one of those things that like I lived in New York and Edinburgh and London and all this stuff. And it was the first time I kind of started to understand the city. And then I was like, oh, now I get when people are like, oh, this is like my forever city. Yeah. And it was more like, I grew up in like an arts background. So doing like theater and musicals and all that sort of stuff.
You did?
Yeah. Well, as in, wait, hold on. I grew up around them, not in, like, I wasn't singing much. I don't have much of a singing voice, but I did act. I did direct. My stepfather was a film actor. My dad was a technical director for festivals. My mom was an administrator. My godparent, like,
this makes so much sense now.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of like artistic influence that's in there.
Lineage. I gotcha. Cool.
Hilariously, this weekend, just as a massive side story, we were watching Lord of the Rings, and Maggie, my wife, and I were watching it, and I was like, what was Ian McKellen before he was like in Lord of the Rings? And he was in X-Men, but he was in like a load of British TV movies, and he was big on the like London stage. And my mum reminded me that when I was a kid, I sat in the Royal Box in the Royal Albert Hall in London, which is this massive like round like classical music venue. And she's like, oh yeah, you sat next to Ian McKellen like when you were a kid. I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, like, blah, blah, blah. Well, this person knew that person. I was like, cool. Like, my mom and my dad accidentally name drop all the time. Yeah. And it's hilarious because it's just like, I'm just like, wait, how did I never know that like they were the circles that we were in? And it was because, similar to St. Louis, like the art circles, once you're in them, like everyone kind of knows everyone.
Exactly.
Like specifically if you're in London, like, yeah, London's a bigger place, but there aren't that many people in the classical music scene. Like, and once you're in it at any side, like, you know, level, you know, those circles, it's like, oh, I know this person. Oh, and this person loves this. So it's like, that was how it was always that side of stuff. But yeah, so I grew up in and around that for, you know, as long as I can remember. I've seen, and this is like a family joke, but I've seen the Nutcracker way too many times and I never ever want to see it again. But then any musical, I'm like, oh, I'm all about it. Like I went to go and see Les Mis at the Fox here, you know, and it's just like that side of stuff. I love kind of seeing, like being part of that, but I love being behind the scenes. Yeah. So I'm not a front and center, like I must be an actor.
Yeah.
So,
but that's what's really cool though, which is, again, we're going to tie this into your merchandising. You know, you have such an appreciation for the city. You have an appreciation for the arts, which is great that now that you're in St. Louis and you have Bayoc, you are still kind of carrying that philosophy out in the sense that like you are still part of the behind the scenes, the merchandising aspect of it and the branding of everything through your business. So I think what a lot of entrepreneurs aspire to, and sometimes they don't, maybe their idea doesn't get as well received the same way maybe yours did. But what, you know, Jon is a really great example of is carrying out the mission that he started with and being able to do that during your day job, which, you know, a lot of times, like, you know, even like I'm trying to figure out too with day jobs and stuff, what to do. There's always kind of that concept of 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, and maybe there isn't always the creativity aspect. And so I commend you for still carrying out your artistic background and philosophies, and then also adding the business side to it. So congratulations on all your endeavors. Yeah.
But I mean, that's the big side of coming from an arts background, is you realize that the belief of like most people in the arts don't have that much money, so they don't have money to just splurge on merchandise. And so therefore, like having that mentality of like everything that Bayoc does is we're trying to give people another form of like passive income, as passive as it can be, but like, you know, you still need to be able to promote it and be on your social media channels and tell people it's there. No one's just randomly, you know, going and finding like random Bayoc designs. Like if I put it up, we have to go through and do all of that side of stuff. And it takes a lot to do it, but understanding that we're there as, like I said, a revenue stream rather than like, you know, someone that you're paying is a big side of it that kind of comes from that like artistic background and knowing how a lot of our arts organizations have existed. So yeah, it's definitely been fun, and it's always that thing of like, what's next and where are we going to and how are we building, without it being, you know, we need to be there right now. I'm very happy watching what other companies in this town are doing and making sure we're not, you know, we're doing that too sort of thing. Like you can get into that thing of like the XFL are coming back and all of a sudden everyone's announcing everything and we're just, let's let everyone get over the hype. We have our collection and things like that, and it's been there and it's never gone away. Like in our opinion, it was just there and just kind of pottering through. And then what's our angle? Because so many people, like the XFL have their official t-shirts and hats and hoodies and stuff. Other companies have t-shirts, hats, hoodies. It's like, what's our angle on this that we can come in and maybe do something that's just a little bit different? And that's what we're announcing next week. So,
well, I was going to say what's casually next, but stay tuned. We're going to see what hype is coming from Bayoc. So you already answered my last question. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean that's like we're always looking at redeveloping. Like I really never want to get just stagnant and we're just producing t-shirts and things like that. Like to the point that we're about to pull out old machinery and get rid of that and then put in new machinery. You know, what's new, and taking a kind of leap of faith in where the technology is going. Because if you're not at the front edge of it, you're then chasing everyone else that's already had it. So that's kind of where we're trying to innovate with of what that allows us to offer different people and what like it adds to our like service kind of bow and arrow.
There we go.
To circle back to Robin Hood. There you go. Done.
That was literally, I was just about to say, I'm like, and did Robin Hood exist? Are Jon and Robin Hood related? We'll find out, everybody. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you
This
for
was
having me.
lovely. I know, I think I've kept him for too long, and he actually has to go back to his real job just right behind this wall here. So Jon, before we leave, why don't you tell us, I always joke like with him in the beginning where I'm like, oh, where can we find you? And I just business-wise for Bayoc, where can people go, like Instagram, the website for apparel?
So everything's just Bayoc, BYJACK. So it's bayoc.com. Instagram's at Bayoc. Facebook, if you use it, and Twitter are Bayoc Official. But just, you can just search for Bayoc. And the best way to get in touch with us if you are interested in starting a store, or, you just need one-off t-shirts for, a family vacation or something like that, just go to bayoc.com, go to our contact thing, and it'll all come. You can talk to us on our chat applet, but you're going to be talking to me, basically.
Yay.
As much as I'm like, oh, email this person, it's just like, it's always me. So.
It's always Jon. It's the Beebs, everybody. Well, thank you so much again for joining the Casually Molly podcast. Stay tuned for more interviews coming up. You can always follow at the Casually Molly podcast. That is Molly with an I-E. And you can always subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Honestly, wherever you stream, I'll make sure that I make sure that this is accessible for you. Thank you again. Now I always ask, what are you going to casually do now that our episode is over?
Go and now fulfill everything that's been in our store over the weekend. What day is it today? It is Monday, right?
It is Monday.
It's Monday,
yes.
Yep. So everything that came in over the weekend, we'll start fulfilling that and just cleaning up the workshop a bit. Like I said, we're pulling out machinery and doing all that sort of stuff. So
we'll have fun.
Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody. Thank you.